Episode 22, Swan Song, first aired March 3rd, 1974. The story was written by Stanley Ralph Ross, who we met as the teleplay writer for Any Old Port in a Storm. And the teleplay for this episode is written by David Rayfiel, who wrote the screenplay for Castle Keep, The Firm, and wrote Round Midnight. And the director for Swan Song is Nicholas Colasanto, who previously directed Etude in Black. He only directs music-themed episodes. This episode begins with a sign reading "Tonight Only, Tommy Brown and the Lost Soul Crusaders," as a harmonica plays and a beautiful 1972 Cadillac Fleetwood Eldorado convertible pulls up. A man in black asks the parking attendant guy how the box office is doing, and he says they're all sold out. And the man says that's great as he gives the parking guy a tip. The man in black and his driver enter the amphitheater, and he's got all sorts of requests for this other man to handle.
I want you to check out the sound system, Luke. I want you to find me an engineer. While I'm performing, I want you to keep the candy hawkers and the picture sellers out of the aisles. Okay.
This location used to be the Gibson Amphitheater, also known as the Universal Amphitheater, located in Universal City, California. And it was extremely popular. It opened in 1972, hosting its very first concert, a Broadway rock musical called Jesus Christ Superstar, and was a real hot spot for concerts of very big names. Just a few being John Denver, Bob Dylan, Elton John, Steve Martin, Dolly Parton, Frank Sinatra, and Robin Williams. In 1980, they spent 2 years constructing a roof over top for year-round entertainment, as well as adding another 6,000 seats. The final performance was on September 6, 2013, by Pepe Aguilar, who said he felt honored to be the final show, but he also felt sad. The Gibson Amphitheater was demolished soon afterwards to make way for the Wizarding World of Harry Potter theme park. Because of course, you can't build an awesome Harry Potter theme park in a less used or less loved area, Universal. You must tear down something special that people enjoyed. Otherwise, there would be too many happy people. There must always be a sacrifice.
Praise the Lord, I saw the light.
Umbrella? This singing legend is the great Johnny Cash, born February 26, 1932, in Kingsland, Arkansas. He is much more known for his singing and songwriting than his acting. A few of his signature songs include I Walk the Line, Folsom Prison Blues, Ring of Fire, and Man in Black. Because he grew up very poor during the Great Depression, he always had a strong sympathy for working-class people, and you can hear it in his lyrics of many of the songs he wrote. But since today on Columbo he is an actor, let's have a look at some of his other works. He stars in A Gunfight, Murder in Coweta County, and The Last Days of Frank and Jesse James.
Then what you're saying is that one of us ought to really kill the other. Is that what you're saying?
Winner take all. Loser won't need any.
Anyway, we get to listen to Johnny Cash. Well, actually, the character's name is Tommy Brown. Forgot to mention that. But we get to hear the whole song of I Saw the Light, and cut into the visuals is footage from his very first concert of 1974 in Binghamton, New York. This concert took place pretty much near the end of filming. He left LA to go do that concert and then came back for whatever was left over to complete. Can you imagine getting to go to a Johnny Cash concert in New York and then end up in the intro of an episode of Columbo starring Johnny Cash? I'd show this episode to anyone that came over just so I can point to the screen and say, there I am, Gary, there I am. And this guy right here who got a close-up of him shaking hands with Johnny on film, and it ended up in a Columbo intro. That's just wild. Just look at this beautiful crowd of people. We have photo albums full of them. Now that the concert is over, Tommy Brown is trying to make his way to his dressing room, but he's surrounded by screaming girls and even a few fellas. Man, all those gospel praise songs for the Lord really got these girls heated up. I can't tell you the name of a single one of these girls, but if I could, I wish I could identify this one. The choir leading lady tells these frenzied girls to get out of here.
You hear me? You all go home.
And get your homework done. This security guard is so disappointed in the youth today. And now she's all winded from telling them to go home.
Sis,
Yes.
when you gonna tell me what you got on Tommy that makes him toe the line like that?
Well, I'll tell you when I think it's fit for you to know.
If anything ever happened to you, I don't know.
The good Lord will see that it doesn't.
This woman is named Edna Basket Brown, played by Ida Lupino, born February 4th, 1918, in Camberwell, London, England. We remember her as Roger's Aunt Doris in Short Fuse. Then we see Tommy on the phone with the weather service to find out conditions for flying. The man says if they take off soon, they can beat the low visibility fog rolling in after midnight. And then the scene changes to the manager of the building inviting the gospel singing group to come back again.
Hell, we can sell out Tommy Brown for damn near a month here.
I don't hold with profanity, Mr. Dodds.
Mr. Dodds is played by Harry Harvey, born in what used to be called Indian Territory at the time of his birth on January 10th, 1901. Later, what was once Indian Territory merged with the Oklahoma Territory to create the state of Oklahoma in 1907. Did you know this Indian Territory almost became its own state called Sequoia? Well, Harry Harvey has been in over 400 film and television productions, but we'll just list a few. He was an extra in This Gun for Hire, which got a special shout-out during Any Old Port in a Storm.
Which Alan Ladd movie is it?
This Gun for Hire.
Oh, that's a good one. That's the one where he has the broken wrist.
He was the doctor in Ace in the Hole, and he was in 54 episodes of The Roy Rogers Show and about every episode of It's a Man's World. Well, Edna denies his invitation to continue shows here because their schedule is too busy. Plus, they have a special ceremony for the groundbreaking at the Tabernacle site on Tuesday.
Are you folks really spending $5 million to build it?
It'll be the finest temple to the glory of the Almighty in America.
Your end of tonight's take is $30,000.
Mike Lowley, you are just busy, aren't you? We know Mike Lowley previously from Lady in Waiting, Short Fuse, Blueprint for Murder, Etude in Black, Requiem for a Falling Star, A Stitch in Crime, Double Shock, Any Old Port in a Storm, Candidate for Crime, Double Exposure, Publisher Perish, and Mind Over Mayhem. And did you see that big old Zodiac wall decoration we first saw in Candidate for Crime and Publisher Perish? And this little Aztec-looking statue is from Double Exposure. Now back to Tommy. He grabs his suitcase, opens it, takes out a very red thermos that really stands out on screen. It was the same one used by Columbo in Publisher Perish. He also removes a bunch of papers and replaces them with what we will find out later is a parachute. Then he takes from his guitar case some pills. He opens the capsules and empties the white powder into the thermos, and then pours in what's supposed to be hot coffee, but there is no steam and it looks awfully thin. He shakes it up, and the whole time he has a very upset and I'll show you type expression. By the way, after reading about Johnny Cash's life, there was one little story that stuck out to me in relation to this moment we just watched. While he was on tour in 1965, he got arrested in El Paso, Texas by a narcotics squad because they found hundreds of pills hidden in his guitar case. Well, he replaces his guitar, and in walks Edna with one of the choir girls. He says he wants to talk to her about something.
You got $1 million in escrow to build a tabernacle, and you can't get the rest without me. And I was thinking maybe you and I could compromise. You take half the money for the crusade, and I'll take half.
She immediately gets upset and says every penny is going to the crusade until that tabernacle is built. Tommy gets honest with her about how he's had enough of their current situation.
You can push a man too far, Edna. I'm being used, and I don't like it. Other singers drive around in Ferraris, Rolls. I don't even own a car.
He says, I'm the reason there is even an audience out there. It's my records they're buying. Edna reminds him that she is the one who got him out of the Arkansas prison farm he was rotting in. Then we learn a surprising little storyline.
I kept my part of the deal, Edna. I married you.
You are a lustful sinner, Tommy. May God forgive me for letting a devil help me build a temple.
Then they start quoting the Bible at each other.
I seem to remember a little Bible myself, Edna. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord.
That verse comes from Deuteronomy 32:35. The Bible itself quotes it again in the book of Hebrews and Romans. Without going into a Bible study, this verse in Deuteronomy is basically God's anger toward the Israelites for worshiping false gods, rebelling against and ignoring him as they get fat off his blessings. Then Edna takes her turn and tries to use the Bible for her bidding.
It was also written, the Lord works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform.
But do you know what's so funny about her saying that? Nowhere in the Bible does it say the Lord works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. She is quoting a hymn written in 1773 by the poet William Cowper. But the way she says it is also written kind of infers that she is also quoting the Bible. Well, you're not, Edna. And then she starts spitting out some blackmail that she seems to hit him with regularly. She says she and Maryann will punish him if he tries to leave the crusade.
Those people out there just might not believe you and Maryann.
How about those motels where you register as a father and daughter? How old were you then, child?
16.
I think Ida Lupino is trying to do a Southern American accent, but it's more of an unknown accent, all on its own. So it seems Edna uses Maryann as a constant threat anytime he acts up. She warns that his handwriting will certainly be on those motel registers.
Hasn't been but 3 years, Tommy, but I've read the law. The statute of limitation hasn't run out yet on the Mann Act.
The Mann Act, passed in 1910, whose primary intent was to address prostitution, debauchery, or other immoral acts. Because it was originally written kind of ambiguous with a basic word of immorality, people were being arrested for consensual behavior as well. So it was amended in 1978 and again in 1986 to get a little more specific about prostitution and other illegal, immoral acts.
Statutory rape.
Whoa. That's basically defined as no matter how much consent goes on, a minor is too young to be making life decisions like that with an adult and are legally incapable of giving any consent. So, now Edna, feeling full of power and with a smile, tells Tommy he will not be quitting the crusade. Tommy gets up, furious and trapped, punches the desk, and turns to Edna to tell her what for.
You're a sanctimonious hypocrite of a Bible-spouting blackmailer, and I've given you your last chance to be fair.
Your insults and threats don't scare me.
Well, it was considerate of him to give her that chance, but sounds like this is going to be it for her. Then enters the man that refers to Edna as his sister.
Mr. Dodds is ready for you, sis.
She says she won't be long, and Tommy says we'll take your time because we can't fly anyway.
Oh, why not?
Weather's bad in L.A. Improving after midnight. I'm gonna grab a couple hours shut-eye. Hey, Luke, take this guitar on the bus with you. And don't let that guitar get broken, Luke.
Luke Baskett is played by Bill McKinney, born September 12, 1931 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He was in the films Deliverance, The Outlaw Josie Wales, The Shootist, and Rambo: First Blood.
Texas is full of rebels. Lots of work to do down in Texas.
We get Josie Wales and it ends.
Doing right ain't got no end.
Do you remember this tiger from Double Shock? I knew you did. Well, our scene changes to a 1973 Chevy Nova, pulling up to an airplane hangar at night.
Hi, Miss Brown. Miss Brown.
Evening.
And the airplane mechanic gives Tommy a hearty handshake, letting him know how much he admires him.
What's your name?
Jeff.
Jeff is played by Douglas Dirksen, born May 17, 1943 in Lewistown, Montana. You can find him in Harry's War, Blood Feud, and Footloose. Tommy asks him to stow his luggage, and Edna tells him to hurry up. Before getting on the plane, Tommy offers his rent-a-car to Jeff to drive around a bit before turning it in because there's still some time left on it.
I sure do appreciate that, sir.
You'll do no such thing. You'll turn that car in right away, and I've checked the mileage.
Yes, ma'am. $5.
This plane is a Cessna 172L Skyhawk. Then we get to see the clouds flying by and the turbulence shaking them around. I learned the way you would turn the heat on and off in a plane like this is with a mechanical knob that you would pull or push. This switch used in the episode is for the alternator, which should be on before firing up the engine. You see it says Alt on the left. It was relabeled for the audience so we could see a nice little red light turn off. Well, a few moments later, Edna's got some complaining to do.
Tommy, we're cold.
Heater's busted. I got some coffee here, hot coffee.
Edna tries the coffee and has a little more complaining to do.
Tom, this is the most horrible coffee I've ever tasted.
Tommy stays silent as Edna pours a cup for Maryann. Edna is one of the victims where we can, we all know murder is wrong. But we can, kind of sympathize with the murderer just a little bit because the victim is such a... Well, pardon my French, but the victim is a real jerk.
I'm also going to tell him about the way you run your business, because whether he forgives me or not, he's going to despise you for lying to him.
I want you to reconsider. Your husband has some very powerful friends.
That's right. Now, if you please excuse me.
If your name wasn't Chadwick, and you didn't have all of this, do you really think that Peter Hamilton would give you a second look?
I mean, you snobs can drink your wine, but I want the cash.
Don't worry. You'll be taken care of.
I'm sure the Marino brothers will let you lick the labels of their new carbonated rosé.
Maryann is played by Bonnie Van Dyke, born February 1st, 1953. She barely did any acting, and somehow she ended up here. We see the plane from the outside to give us the idea that some time has passed, and then back in the plane they both start closing their eyes and going into a deep sleep. Now it's time for Tommy to perform his greatest stunt. He wraps belts and buckles around him and clips a parachute to his shoulders. Then he reaches behind him to grab the drugged coffee thermos and tosses it out the plane. Then Tommy takes his turn and hops out of the plane with his parachute, which looks like it opened successfully. And there goes the plane, flying off into the mountains, and here comes Tommy, landing, I'm sure, far, far away from wherever that plane crashed. Looks like he might have hurt his leg. Well, look at him crawl. Maybe he just hurt his ankle, because he's scurrying all over the place. Although, when things are super intense and emotions and adrenaline take over, sometimes pain isn't so painful until you calm down. He hides his parachute in a very handy, hollowed-out log and then hobbles along the forest floor, seeing there are some headlights in the distance. And what do you know? He has already found the plane wreck, engulfed in flames. How did he get here? He throws himself down the steep hill and plays dead because that truck is coming to investigate. It's sure convenient the plane crashed on a dirt road. The Good Samaritans come check on Tommy and figure this guy must still be alive. This is the second episode where the original murder is a double homicide. The first one was short fuse when Roger blew up Uncle David and his chauffeur Quincy. Scene change to Columbo's car driving the dirt road that leads straight to the wreckage with some country western harmonica playing.
Sorry, you can't come into this area.
It happens all the time that people comment on Columbo's car not looking like a police car, but this is the third time someone just says you can't be here with your car.
That spot's reserved.
Oh, I see. All right. Who was it reserved for?
The police.
Hey, mister! Didn't you see me signaling?
I'm a cop, sir.
Right, you're a cop. Now, look, can you back this up and move it down the hill with
Officer,
the rest
you
of the
don't
traffic?
understand.
I understand.
I'm from the Los Angeles Police Department. Lieutenant Columbo. Who's in charge here?
Columbo gets out and walks up to the scene where there is an interview going on, being filmed by a new fancy handheld camera that does not have a battery backpack. I wish I knew what kind it was.
Mr. Pangborn is heading up the investigation of this very tragic air crash.
Columbo walks over to the burnt-up wreckage of the plane, and the TV camera guy calls out Columbo.
Oh, this fella's been wandering around in the shot. It's getting very distracting, Hal. I'm sorry.
The frustrated TV cameraman is played by Mike Edward Lowley, born February 25th, 1935 in Los Angeles, California. Yes, you guessed it. This is Mike Lowley's son. I really wish I knew who the light-holding man is. He's the best-dressed light-holding man with the most sturdy light-holding stance.
Excuse me, this is one of the big problems we have at these crash sites. Curiosity seekers. Yes, sir. I'll have to ask you to leave.
Columbo introduces himself and says it's a miracle this guy got out of the plane.
You know who was relieved? My wife. She's a big fan of this fella's. Knows all his albums.
After I shared my opinion about Mrs. Columbo being a real human person, since many people believe she is made up by Columbo, I was given a new argument why Mrs. Columbo is not real, and that is basically Columbo uses her to throw off murderers, and he only talks about her to those he thinks is the murderer. I bring this up because Columbo is talking about his wife to this Mr. Pangborn, and what in the world reason should he be making up stories about his wife loving Tommy Brown's music to this guy? Plus, we have already seen before that Columbo talks about his wife to non-suspects all the time.
If I was in the hands of kidnappers and my wife didn't ask me if I was okay, I'd think about that. I'm the worst cook in the world, but there's one thing I do terrific, and that's an omelet. Even my wife admits it. Well, what kind of a question is that? Do I really have a niece?
Well, do you?
Of course I've got a niece. My wife's sister's girl. Can I tell you about my wife? You know, my wife, she's got a proverb for every situation. You know, with her... Oh, you see, I already have 2 cars. Of course, my wife's car is nothing special. That's just for transportation, you understand. If I forget this, my wife will kill me. Now, my wife went bowling, and I was sort of testing out this new hammock, listening to the game. Then I ran into this Sunday. Yeah. Excuse me, sir. You didn't happen to notice my luggage? Purple kind of flowers. That is my wife.
Luggage inquiries, bail left, sir.
My wife always calls about some errand at the grocery store.
Bit different this time. Death in the family.
But I got another car. My wife drives it. Of course, it's nothing special, just for transportation. My wife's not feeling too good. Stomach trouble or something. She'll be all right. You know, my wife went to visit her mother for a few days, and it's like everything was waiting for her to leave so it could happen to me. On every one of my wife's drawers. On the lotion, on the tubes, on the cream. I guess you're not married, huh?
No, I'm not.
Hey, I gotta call my wife. I gotta get out of here.
You can't leave here without a temporary in that mood.
My wife's got no head for crime. We go to those whodunit movies, she always picks the wrong murderer. If my wife decided to murder me, she could come up with a better alibi than you got. 2 o'clock in the morning, my wife wants to watch Betty Davis. So we're watching Betty Davis. Well, he doesn't have a name. My wife and I, we could never agree on one. We just say hey, or dog, or whistle. Doesn't make any difference. He don't come when you call him anyway.
Columbo seems to talk to non-suspects about his wife just as much as his suspects. Well, anyway, let's move on with our story. Columbo says, can you imagine getting out of this thing alive?
Unusual, but not unheard of.
Roland Pangborn is played by John Dehner, born November 23, 1915 in New York City. He was a man of many skills, speaking 4 languages, professional piano man and band leader, as well as a classic animator. He worked for Disney for a while for $18 a week, I guess. He's an uncredited animator for Bambi and Fantasia, and also did voice acting for some Donald Duck shorts and a variety of other old animated shorts from the 40s and 50s. You know, the kind we're incapable of ever making again. You know those. Anyway, he also guest starred in over 100 TV shows, some of them being The Roaring Twenties, Gunsmoke, The Virginian, and The Doris Day Show.
There's no use sitting down. You're coming with me. There's a big story breaking at the Fashion Arcade over in Sausalito.
Columbo reveals he is from Homicide, and of course this disturbs and confuses Mr. Pangborn.
Why is Homicide interested in this, Lieutenant?
We got a complaint from a member of the family, Mrs. Brown's brother. Nothing definite, just suspicion of foul play.
Pangborn says the pilot, Tommy Brown, claims total electrical failure, which is what they call probable cause, but unofficially Pangborn says it is most likely pilot error.
Almost always is. You see, Brown was not instrument rated, and he flew into minimal weather, and he lost his orientation.
The reporter calls over to Mr. Pangborn so they can finish the interview.
We're losing the light. It would just take a moment. We'd like to get this film back to the lab. Fellows?
So Pangborn heads over to the reporter, but then remembers he's his own man and doesn't have to obey this reporter fellow while he was in the middle of a conversation, so he turns around and walks back over to Columbo.
I'm sorry. Look, just stand by with the lights.
The TV reporter is played by Larry Burrell, and we have already met him back in the episode Candidate for Crime. Columbo wondered if they checked Brown's blood for alcohol or drugs, and Pangborn says yes, they checked it at the hospital and he was cold sober. Then Columbo asks if Brown called the weather station before flying.
Told me he did when I talked to him at the hospital. But he'd made the flight lots of times, and he felt he could sneak through okay.
Please, we're losing the light.
Pangborn heads back over to finish the interview, and the reporter is getting fed up.
Let's go.
Keep him in tight.
Mr. Pangborn.
While we listen to the interviewer talking in the background, we watch Columbo find the detached, burnt-up seat belts. Seeing the 2 in the back seat were both buckled, but the pilot's seatbelt was undone. It's just incredible those seatbelts survived the fire, while the body of the plane burnt into oblivion. Which actually brings up an interesting point. This plane wreckage is of a tube and fabric aircraft, meaning the main body's framework is constructed of welded metal tubes and covered with a layer of fabric, making it a very lightweight and quite a sturdy structure. It also has what they call a tandem cockpit, where there is 1 seat in the front and 1 seat in the back. But the Cessna 172 they were flying had a body made of aluminum as well as side-by-side seating. Very, very different planes. Well, moving on to Columbo's investigation, and he finds the navigation kit that was supposed to hold maps and charts and such. Then Pangborn finishes the interview and heads right back over to Columbo. Columbo shares that the 2 seatbelts in the back were buckled and says, well, that explains why the pilot was thrown from the plane and the 2 women weren't. And Pangborn says he doesn't follow.
I noticed the pilot's seatbelt, not fastened.
My golly, you're right.
See, it must have been opened before the crash.
Then Columbo wants to show Pangborn something else.
What's this?
That's a pilot's navigation kit. They keep their charts in it.
Gee, that's funny. No ashes.
You could have taken the charts out and laid them on the unoccupied co-pilot seat, but those ashes would be in among all those other ashes.
Pangborn starts to compliment Columbo and seems very impressed with Columbo's observations he has already made in the short time he was here. He says he could use a man like him on his team.
Oh, no, thank you very much. You fellas, you have to fly. I wouldn't qualify for that.
Why? We teach you.
I appreciate it, sir, but my ears pop in an elevator. As a matter of fact, I don't even like being this tall.
And too tall for Columbo is 5'6". I really appreciate this character, Mr. Pangborn, because he was immediately mutually respectful to Columbo once he found out who he was, and even trying to hire him onto his team. Now the scene changes to Columbo arriving at the funeral home while the hymn Blessed Assurance is playing. And look who our funeral director is.
My name is Mr. Grindell.
How do you do?
Are you a relative of Mrs. Brown?
No, I'm just here to see a relative.
I see. You are a friend of the family.
This is dear Vito Scotti, previously from Any Old Port in a Storm as the waiter and Candidate for Crime as a tailor. But this role is my absolute favorite of his. He is so funny and really convincing as a kind, passionate funeral director that also really badly wants to sell you a funeral package. He lets Columbo know that he missed a lovely service.
Mr. Brown sang several popular hymns. Rock of Ages.
I am not a friend of the family. Actually, I'm a policeman, Lieutenant Columbo. Homicide.
Speaking of Tommy Brown singing popular hymns like Rock of Ages, Johnny Cash released a gospel album in 1975, and he happens to sing Rock of Ages.
Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee.
Columbo says he's here to see Luke Basket, and Mr. Grindell lets Columbo know he's paying his last respects before the bodies are shipped out to Nashville. But he should be out shortly, so Columbo says, okay, I'll just wait out here. And this is when the scene really takes off as Mr. Grindell hands Columbo his card and gets a tiny little ashtray for Columbo's cigar. And if you notice while watching the episode on your own, since I cannot show the whole thing no matter how badly I want to, the scene is almost filmed in one long take. He says he is a great admirer of the police, and Columbo says he's so glad to hear that.
After all, you men are so ready to give your life to save ours.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come up too often.
Yes. But it does, doesn't it?
He shares that this morning he was eating breakfast with his wife Martha, and glancing through the paper, he noticed the police mortality rate is just shocking.
You must be aware of that.
Well, we don't like to think about it too often.
But one should think of it. Shouldn't one?
There is a small moment of silence with Columbo starting to get a little uncomfortable on this topic, but he's very polite, of course. Then Mr. Grindell decides he will go ahead and ask the question.
Have you made plans for your own departure from this mortal sphere?
No.
Huh?
No, I haven't, no.
He tries the, it would take care of your loved ones so they don't have to go through the trouble and pay the expense pitch. Columbo just politely nods, and Mr. Grindell quickly grabs a brochure to help him visualize the benefits from a variety of different plans.
You know, I appreciate it very much, but my wife does all the shopping in the family. She'd be very upset if I bought anything, without talking to her about it first.
Of course. Can we make an appointment?
Columbo pauses for a moment, realizing this guy is not going to give up on selling him a funeral plan, so he tries to make it a little more obvious that an appointment isn't going to happen.
I couldn't talk to her about this, Mr. Grindell. She'd think I was working on a dangerous case. She cries easily. She cries when she loses at bowling.
You're a hard sell, Lieutenant.
Well, I'm sorry.
Finally, Luke Basket shows up to rescue Columbo from the funeral director. They walk and talk, and Columbo asks Luke if he knows what's kept in the navigation kit. Luke says yes, he knows what's in it, and there wasn't anything unusual about it last night. And I don't personally think I would have chosen this particular design for these fences and railings. There's something kind of funny about them.
I'm not very smart, and I don't know how I did it. I just know somehow I did. Because he hated my sister. He never loved her.
That doesn't explain why he would kill her.
She had something on him.
Luke says, you don't know Tommy Brown like I do. You've got to question him. And Columbo says, well, he's planning on it. Then Luke insists he ought to do it right now, today. But Columbo rightly says, well, I don't think today would be the right time, referring to the fact that it was his wife's funeral today.
Lieutenant, I want you to see what Tommy Brown's like. I want you to talk to him. Would you do that for me, please, as a personal favor? Today, please?
Columbo hesitates, but I suppose feels obligated by how serious and persistent Luke is about this, so he agrees.
All right.
I'm coming with you.
This is one of those really small moments that I love and find very funny, where Luke stares him down without a single change in expression, while Columbo doesn't really seem to want him to come along, but also doesn't want to have any confrontations with Luke, so he stays silent and gets in the car. The scene changes to Columbo flying into Tommy Brown's driveway. They get out of the car, and you can hear Tommy singing in the background as Luke says, "See what I mean? He couldn't wait." He says Tommy rented this place while he was still in the hospital, and it cost him $2,000 a month.
You know, there's no law against that, Mr. Baskin.
Listen to all that going on out yonder. My sister ain't even been in her grave yet.
Columbo suggests it might not be a good idea for Luke to see Tommy right now, and Luke does not care. Columbo says he's going to have to tell Tommy that he's the one who filed the complaint, and then has to put his foot down real quick.
I want to see the look on his face.
Just a minute. Now listen to me. When I talk to him, I'm going to have to talk to him alone. And if you're going to cause trouble...
I won't. I promise you. I won't do that.
Okay.
So they head around back and come in through the gate to find Tommy Brown playing guitar with the whole band, and his voice is amplified without a mic, surrounded by bikini ladies, and he sings about Sunday morning. Shall we meet the band real quick? This is Marshall Grant, born May 5th, 1928, in Bryson City, North Carolina. He wasn't an actor, of course. He was actually Johnny Cash's longtime bassist for his band, the Tennessee Three, both upright and electric bass, for almost 30 years. Despite a few fights here and there, Marshall was probably Johnny's closest friend. He wrote the song Long-Legged Guitar-Pickin' Man, which appeared on the Johnny Cash Show and in the 2005 film Walk the Line, a biographical drama about Johnny Cash and his wife, June Carter. Now that drummer back there, I can't identify. And the piano man, I also can't identify. But the guitarist on the right is Bob Wooten, born March 4th, 1942 in Paris, Arkansas. He has kind of an interesting story. He first heard Johnny Cash's album I Walk the Line when he was just a teenager and pretty much taught himself all the songs on guitar. A huge Johnny Cash fan. Well, in 1968, the old stars sure aligned for Bob, as they say. Johnny and the Tennessee Three were scheduled to perform in Fayetteville, Arkansas, but 2 band members were held up due to a storm. So it was just Johnny and his drummer, W.S. Holland, standing there on stage. Well, Bob gets the guts to approach either one of the managers or Johnny himself, saying he can fill in and that he knows all the songs. Another man, Bob Garrett, filled in for bass. The moment they played their first song together is actually recorded.
This time, I'm as anxious as you are to hear how it's going to sound. I understand these 2 fellows are great musicians. They come from around this part of the country. And anyway, let's give a big hand to Bob Garrett and Bob Wooten on the guitar. Now I taught to weeping willow how to cry.
Johnny was shocked with how well he played, and you'll get to hear him holler with joy at Bob's guitar playing.
And I followed you, big river, when you called. Wait,
And Bob Wooten played guitar for Johnny for the next 30 years. One last little piece of fun trivia. Bob was also Johnny Cash's stunt double for The Last Days of Frank and Jesse James, and 4 episodes of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Well, let's get back to the show.
That's Mr. Brown?
That's him.
On a Sunday morning sidewalk, I'm wishing, Lord, that I was stoned.
This song is called Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down, written by Kristofferson, who later became one of the Highwaymen along with Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, and Willie Nelson. Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down was originally performed by Ray Stevens, but later became a #1 hit in the U.S. for Johnny Cash. The lyrics give the description of being alone and down with a hangover the next morning after partying the Saturday night before and feeling depressed, even though Johnny's performance has quite an uplifting tune to it. And if you remember back, this is what was playing on the airplane mechanic's pocket radio before the murder.
Good taste you got in music there.
Yes, sir.
It is interesting this song was chosen to be played here. I'd love to know who picked it and why. Maybe because it has the word Sunday in it. Back again to the episode.
This looks good.
Maybe 7.
How much lunch?
Make 7 home.
What's that? Chili. That looks good.
Yeah, have some.
Think it's all right?
Bill McKinney playing Luke does an absolutely perfect job with his character. his southern hospitality in this scene is so genuine. I feel like I want to maybe grab a bowl of chili while I'm here too. Columbo tries the chili and seems to like it.
Say, that's delicious. I never tasted chili like that before.
That's special recipe made out of squirrel meat. That's good, ain't it?
I just love how matter-of-fact Luke is. No facial expressions at all. He's definitely one of my favorite side characters in the series. Tommy ends his song and yells to Luke, asking where he's been.
I've been to get the cops to find out how you killed Edna.
Columbo regretting Luke talking him into them both meeting with Tommy today.
You did it. You know you did it. You killed both of them. You're fired. Get out of here. You're crazy!
Marshal Grant and the piano man grab Luke to keep him away from Tommy. Tommy demands one of the many nameless bikini ladies to give him his crutch.
Give me that. You crazy?
Here you can easily see why Bob Wooten could pass as a stunt double for Johnny Cash. They look like twins.
Get him out.
Luke finally walks away, but not without the stare of death as he goes. Sunglasses Man in the background is Norman Stevens from Any Old Port in a Storm. Columbo apologizes for this happening.
Who are you?
I'm Lieutenant Columbo. I'm from the LAPD homicide.
Homicide?
Columbo asks if they can talk privately, and there's nothing to get worked up about. There's just a few routine questions he has to ask, and Tommy agrees to talk to Columbo.
Nothing to get excited about, folks. Mr. Brown, be right out.
Those are some of the most bellest of bell-bottoms that piano guy has on. Columbo can't even ask him about his shoes because we aren't sure if he's wearing any. Tommy asks why he is having to talk to someone from homicide.
When a member of the family makes a complaint, well, we just have to go through certain formalities.
Tommy says, well, I guess this looks pretty bad, having this party going on in this big house, and Columbo responds saying, no, it's actually kind of refreshing. It's so cool this rented house comes with a cat.
You see, in my line of work, homicide, somebody is always, well, dead. I mean, they don't even call us in unless that's what it is, somebody dead.
Well, I feel like you might have been called in a couple times before someone was declared dead.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes?
Lieutenant Columbo, local police. You see, that's the trouble with these buildings. The fountains never work. Then you have to use the coffee machine. And then you lose your dime and the coffee's lousy.
I'm just grateful I have so many wonderful friends. You know, I'd like to also take this opportunity.
Where you going?
This way, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. What is it with this guy? Keeps disappearing.
I found him a little early this time. That's him. They're carting away right now.
I am here merely to report to the proper authorities the fact of my having received those threats. Now, I've accepted this police protection.
So, Columbo starts flipping through his notebook to find the questions he wanted to ask Tommy. His first question is why his seatbelt wasn't fastened at the time of the crash.
You see, when the power went off, the lights went out. And I reached across to the glove compartment to try to get a flashlight, and to do that I had to unbuckle my seatbelt. That's when I lost control.
Well, that was a very good and reasonable explanation. Columbo's next question is what happened to the maps and charts that were in the navigation kit?
Well, when the power went off, the defroster quit working, see? So I slid open a window to try to see where I was going, and the suction sucked all the maps and papers and everything right out the window.
Big suction.
Well, that explanation wasn't quite as good. Columbo apologizes again for the drama that happened outside and that he sure hopes his guitar is all right.
Not another guitar in the world with a tone like that. It's a great guitar, handmade. When I take an airliner, I get an extra seat and sit it right beside me.
Lucky thing it wasn't on that plane with you last night.
Last night? You mean the plane crash, Tommy being fixed up at the hospital, renting this house, the funeral, and the party all happened within less than 24 hours? Very efficient. Tommy explains why he didn't bring his guitar on the plane.
The changes in pressure and altitude can affect a good guitar like that, so I told Luke put it on the bus.
Since they are paying so much attention to this beautiful guitar, let's pay a little more attention to it together. This black guitar is Johnny's personal guitar and one of his favorites that you can find him performing on stage with for over 20 years. It is also the very first black Martin D35 ever made. Johnny is the reason why it exists. He asked some of the craftsmen of the Martin Company to make it without asking permission from the president at the time, C.F. Martin III. Martin didn't ever intend to make a black guitar because he didn't like the idea of the beautiful wood used to make his guitars being covered up with black. It turns out Martin didn't learn Johnny's guitar was ever made until this episode aired on television and he saw it. Yes, eventually the Martin Company decided to accept the black Martin. And they had not only the Black Martin D35 made, but also the Black Martin DX. Both were tributes to Johnny Cash. And if you have a spare $5,500 lying around, you too can have a Johnny Cash Black Martin D35 guitar. Well, Columbo says he's very happy Tommy explained why he didn't bring his guitar on the plane, because that's the reason Luke got suspicious.
The fact that you parted with your guitar. He said that was the first time he ever did that.
Well, if that's the first time he ever parted with his guitar, what did he do all the other times he piloted that airplane, since it was an unpressurized cabin? Columbo says that pretty much wraps it up, and they shake hands.
Let me know when I can help you.
And Columbo leaves. Now, taxiing towards us is a 1947 North American Navion. As it gets very close to the screen, we can see through the windshield that neither one of these men are Columbo. Now, we look at a different angle to see poor Columbo is frozen and disoriented with fear after the flight he experienced with the policeman pilot.
Just step right on that seat, Lieutenant. Sir? Just step right on the seat there, sir. You all right, Lieutenant?
Rather than answering the question of if he is all right, he instead shakes hands with the pilot. This kind pilot man is played by Tom McFadden. He was in a few episodes of The Winds of War and shows up in A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. He also likes writing books. They seem to all be the self-help genre. Columbo slowly walks over to an airplane mechanic.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking for someone who might have been around the night that Tommy Brown took off.
Yes, sir. That'd be Jeff. He was on duty that night.
And remember this man, Jefferson Kibbe? Yes, very good. We met him during the episode Mind Over Mayhem. We'll be running into his mother later in the episode. And then there's Jeff, still chomping away on gum while listening to Tommy Brown's music.
Yes, sir. I'm investigating the Tommy Brown airplane crash. Could you give me any information about that flight?
I saw them off, but I don't know anything about that crash.
Columbo wants to know what is involved in seeing them off, and he says, well, I help with the luggage, which included a couple of overnight bags for the ladies.
Mr. Brown didn't have nothing but his navigation kit. Some gum?
No, thank you very much.
And you know me, I have to find out what kind of gum this fella is chewing. He's got a pack of Dentine. Helps keep teeth white and breath fresh. Columbo wonders if there is anything unusual about the luggage.
No. Just luggage.
So the only thing that was in the cabin was the passengers and the navigation kit?
Oh, well, the thermos bottle.
Now there's some new information for Columbo. Finally.
You've been a big help.
I have?
And Columbo walks away. Then we are suddenly in a new scene.
That's nice.
I guess he liked her piano playing. Tommy requests this girl take the arrangements down to the arranger.
Take the arrangements down to the arranger.
Then Tommy scoots ever so slightly closer to this little piano student and puts his arm around her. We do remember seeing her in the opening scene as she was part of the choir.
Then I want you to make me out a big, long list of things that I can do for you for being so nice to Tommy Brown.
She starts looking very uncomfortable, and he asks if she's afraid of him because she backs away every time he tries to get close.
I guess I'm just afraid of myself. It's just so soon about your wife.
I understand. But do you understand that Edna and I didn't love each other?
Don't say that.
Come on in, it ain't locked.
I wish so bad this aspect of Tommy's character, of him chasing very, very young women, wasn't written, because I want to like him, despite his decision to murder 2 people, but we kind of see in this scene that he's not a changed man in any way, and that the deliberate planned encounter with Maryann was not just a fling at the time, lost in their emotions, but that he's still out here looking for more. Tommy instead really needs to find himself a grown woman who will cook him a hearty pot of squirrel chili. He'll never be truly satisfied with these young little chicks he keeps chasing. Although the fact that the door is unlocked is nice because that gives us the comfort that little Tina could leave if she wanted.
Come on in, it ain't locked.
Tina is played by Janit Baldwin, born July 24th, 1953, in Kansas City, Missouri. She was in The Keegans, Ruby, and Make Me an Offer.
Lieutenant Columbo, come right in, rest yourself. What can I get you, Lieutenant? How about some brandy or bourbon? Oh, you look more like a beer man.
Actually, you are correct with bourbon.
I haven't given you a Rorschach test yet, but I've got a hunch you're a bourbon man.
I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I'm forgetting my manners. Would you like a drink?
Yeah, maybe a drop of bourbon.
Bourbon.
Thank you, sir. I'm on duty.
Oh, yeah, almost forgot.
See that table lighter behind Tommy? I have that same one, given to me by a generous fan. Thanks, Ed. Columbo says he's here because his boss won't let him close up the case until every loose end has been tied up.
That's a crying shame, it really is. Man, with your talent, real killers loose out there. And they got you chasing smoke.
The first question Columbo has is about the thermos and what was in it.
Just some coffee?
Coffee.
Why? What does that matter?
Well, I couldn't find it.
I was thrown clear in the crash. And something as light as a thermos could be thrown hundreds of feet.
Columbo pretends to be satisfied with his answer and is about to leave, but one more thing he almost forgot.
Where'd you first learn how to fly?
Tommy says he learned to fly a little while he was in the Air Force, but he washed out of the cadets.
Of course, I got a civilian private license after the Korean War.
Were you in that one?
Yeah, were you?
Yeah, I was in that one, but not in the Air Force.
Let me guess what you were in. MPs.
KP, mostly.
When Tommy guesses Columbo served as an MP, that would be military police, I believe. And Columbo's response with KP means kitchen police, which was slang for the kitchen staff, usually made up of junior military or civilians. And yes, Johnny Cash did indeed serve in the U.S. Air Force from 1950 to 1954 during the Korean War, mostly stationed in West Germany. He was a Morse code intercept operator. And if you remember, during my Murder by the Book review, I mentioned Peter Falk's attempt to join the military near the end of World War II, but because he was missing his right eye, he could not join, so the next option he took was joining the U.S. Merchant Marines, serving as a cook. Columbo asks where Tommy was placed after washing out as a cadet.
Oh, man, you know the service. Whatever bad was going around, that's what I got. Picking up butts, latrine duty, running errands for the CO, whatever. Oh, man, that service life was something.
Then Tommy's phone rings and Columbo says he's done with the questions anyway and leaves.
You heard right, Sid. We're stopping the building on the Tabernacle. Just pay everybody off up to date and tell them we'll get back to them, okay?
Tommy hangs up the phone and sits there in silence for a little bit.
Excuse me, sir.
Lieutenant, if that police career of yours ever fizzles out, you could always make it as a cat burglar.
Columbo apologizes and says there was one other thing he forgot to ask about.
Ask away, little buddy.
I love it that Tommy has become comfortable enough with Columbo to call him Little Buddy. He asked Tommy if he called in for the weather, and Tommy says he sure did.
According to the Bakersfield Weather Bureau, they anticipated a low ceiling in Los Angeles. If you'd left an hour earlier, you would have missed it.
Tommy explains the audience held him up at Bakersfield. They just wouldn't let him off the stage. Then Columbo mentions that Luke says Tommy took a nap before the flight, and Tommy says he always takes a nap before flying late at night, especially after a performance because he was wiped out.
I know those desk jockeys downtown are about to drive you crazy, giving you a bad time, and I know how bad you hate to keep asking all those stupid questions that they send you out here to ask.
Tommy says, tell them all those loose ends they think they're tying up are gonna go nowhere because I was on that plane when it crashed.
And if I'd been up to no good, I wouldn't have risked my own neck in the process.
I'm going to make that point very clear to them, sir.
Columbo takes notes and leaves. The scene now changes to Columbo visiting the Air Force colonel. He wants to get some insight on Tommy Brown.
Never forget the lads who served under me.
Columbo hands him a photo of Tommy and says he served in his outfit in Korea.
Well, what's happened?
He's Tommy Brown now. He's a big star.
Really? Made it in the movies, huh?
No, it's a country and western music.
Good, just so long as he isn't a pilot.
Columbo asks the colonel what Tommy's duty was while under him.
Parachute rigging.
Now everything is making sense. Columbo wants to use the telephone.
Keep it short, will you? Never know when there might be an alert.
Absolutely.
The colonel is played by John Randolph, born June 1st, 1915 in New York City. He was in Seconds, Pretty Poison, Pritzi's Honor, and played Clark Griswold's father in Christmas Vacation.
I'm gonna catch it in the coat, smack it with a hammer. I'm going in with him. Nora?
And we barely get a glimpse, but there's that same big horse statue from Blueprint for Murder, Requiem for a Falling Star, and Any Old Port in a Storm. Well, Columbo gets on the phone and has some trouble getting a hold of the medical examiner's office.
Lieutenant Columbo. Columbo. I'll wait.
The two photos behind Columbo are from the Apollo 11 mission. You got the famous moon and American flag photo with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. A lot of people forget about old Buzz. That's also their photos in the bottom picture. The third guy is Michael Collins, which he is even less talked about.
How big is this flag?
It's not a flag, Lieutenant. It's a banner.
How big is it?
3 square yards.
And there's these books from Mind Over Mayhem.
Parachute is 60 square yards?
Right.
Hello. Yes, I am. Hello. Yes, this is Lieutenant Columbo. I want to order an autopsy.
This autopsy request is, of course, for Edna and Maryann. Also, that plant behind Columbo is the same one from A Stitch in Crime. Same pot and all. Anyway, that scene ends while we start up the next scene in a recording studio. Looks like all the band members are there, as well as Tina. Columbo walks in and Tommy happily welcomes him. We get to hear some more of I Saw the Light because this is the playback from last night's concert.
We were there.
At the concert?
My wife and I. We were there.
Columbo notices something about this version.
Sounds different here. And I noticed last night at the concert.
Yeah, live audience. That's why the different sound. It's recorded live.
Oh, that explains.
You know, little buddy, there's a question I'd like to ask you.
He wants to know why he dug up his wife's body for an autopsy. Just what is he expecting to find? Columbo says it's not an unusual police procedure, but that they did find barbiturates in both bodies.
According to their religious beliefs, they were prohibited from taking any drugs or stimulants.
That's true. But they used to get airsick, so they took an air sickness pill.
But these barbiturates were sleeping pills.
That's interesting. This episode never details what religion Edna was part of, which is actually a very good thing. But Tommy calmly explains that sleeping pills work just like air sickness pills.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Columbo asks if he could have a copy of last night's concert.
Be in the stores, couple of months.
This man with his face taking up the screen is played by Sorrell Booke, born January 4th, 1930 in Buffalo, New York. If you do recognize him, it's likely because you've watched The Dukes of Hazzard. He played Boss Hogg in every episode. After that, he did mostly voice acting for cartoons from 1983 to 1994.
Well, boss, we need a loan.
Oh, is that what you want, a loan? Never let it be said that J.D. Hogg's Bank of Hazzard County ever turned down a fair request of any citizen.
Yep, we will see him again in a future episode as well. I know you were going to let me know if I didn't say it. I'm sure you already told me about the other guy that will be in a future episode too. Well, that's all Columbo needed here, so the scene ends. Now Columbo's going to pay a visit to the Lost Souls Crusade Seamstress Department. Columbo does not introduce himself or say why he is here. He just walks up to a white bolt of fabric and asks,
May I,
And instead of the lady inquiring about who he is or why he's here, she responds with,
Are your hands clean? Let me see.
Columbo picks it up and asks if it's nylon.
Yes, I prefer cotton, but people today, even our own people, just don't want anything that requires care.
It must be normal for random people to walk in here while they're working and just visit about fabric. Finally, Columbo decides it's time to introduce himself.
My name is Lieutenant Columbo. I'm from the Los Angeles Police Department.
Columbo, that's an Italian name.
Could you tell me how much fabric
My
you need?
husband was half Italian.
Columbo explains he's part of an investigation.
Are you with the Vice Squad? I remember having a good time.
No. No, ma'am. No, I'm not with the Vice Squad.
Columbo wants to take a closer look at the white nylon fabric. He starts unrolling it and flustering the seamstress because he doesn't seem to have any regard for wrinkles or the possibility of it falling on the floor.
Be careful now. Don't let it go all the way to the end there. You'll soil it.
I'm curious about the yardage.
Well, you certainly are.
Columbo starts doing a little math and says this can't be 60 square yards.
It isn't even 20.
Do you have more?
Oh, yes. We have a reserve. Just a minute, I'll show it to you.
And oddly, just like during the intro to Double Shock, this scene is sped up, with her finding the cupboards empty of reserved fabric. Sure is nice those cupboards have their own lighting inside. So, from visiting with her, we learn there are 3 missing bolts at 15 square yards each. Columbo thanks her for her time, and he leaves. This seamstress is played by Lucille Meredith from Candidate for Crime, mother of Jefferson at the airport, and wife of Roland, the producer. Now we are at another new location with the biggest table I've ever seen. Quilters would love that table. A man is folding up a parachute while some music from Candidate for Crime plays. They put the parachute in the navigation kit to see if it fits.
It fits.
Of course, there's no harness attached to this. You wouldn't get it in with a conventional chute harness.
What about an unconventional one? Something homemade?
Yeah, it's possible.
Parachute Man is played by Richard Kane, born 1938 in Rochester, New York. He did a little acting here and there. He was in 19 episodes of General Hospital.
What do you think?
Anybody jumping in that would have a much faster rate of descent than normal.
At least 20% faster. The guy would probably break an arm, a leg, or a pelvis or something.
Pangborn says he knows what Columbo is getting at with this, but he doesn't see how he can prove anything without finding the chute.
What are you going to do? Dig up that whole mountain? Who could find it?
The guy that hit it.
A new scene of a really cool tape recorder and Columbo putting in a tape for Tommy to hear. This is a Panasonic cassette recorder RQ210S made in the 60s. It's all metal and is the tank of the tape recorders. It even came with its own little microphone. I might have to put this on my Christmas wish list.
This is the original version. This is the new version. I noticed that the arrangement was changed.
You got a good ear for music.
Well, you know I'm Italian.
Columbo says he spoke to Tommy's arranger.
Nick Colasanto.
Yeah, that's him.
Look at these writers getting all creative with naming the arranger Nick Colasanto. Just a little nod to today's director, Nick Colasanto.
You know, he's Italian, too.
Yeah, I know.
Columbo says he asked Colasanto why the arrangement was changed.
Maryann was a soprano, Tina was a contralto.
I think they got this a little backwards in the script, since this new arrangement clearly has an overly obvious high-pitched voice type. Tina should be considered the soprano, because contralto is actually the lowest female singing voice range. Columbo asked Colasanto how long it takes to change an arrangement, and he said it took about a week.
And you wondered how I knew I was going to need a new arrangement a week before Maryann was killed, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, this answers the question of if Maryann was just an unfortunate extra murder or if Tommy intended on killing both of them in the plane crash. Sounds like he fully intended on killing both of them because he was already prepared to replace Maryann before she was killed.
I knew it because I knew I was going to replace Maryann with Tina. I liked her voice better in the solos.
That's exactly what I thought.
Columbo mentioning the pre-planned Tina-Maryann swap reminds me of how Beth Chadwick had already ordered a new car before killing her brother, and Nelson Hayward had already ordered a new jacket before killing Harry.
That's it. Finished. That definitely closes the book on you, sir.
I'm glad to hear it.
Columbo asks to use Tommy's telephone, and Tommy decides to play a little guitar in the meantime. And this is one of those subtle examples of how well Peter Falk can act with his face. He looks sorrowful while Tommy plays. That look of, I wish it didn't have to be this way, but it is. So I think he turns his back to Tommy to make the phone call because he doesn't want to look at him. The nice little melody Tommy is playing here is Clocks and Spoons by John Prine.
Did you get in touch with that Boy Scout troop? How about the Forest Ranger Patrol and the Sheriff's Mountain Squad? They'll start tomorrow first thing? Good.
Tommy asks if that phone call had something to do with him, and Columbo says yes, it did.
Did you drink any of that coffee that was in that thermos bottle that you took on the flight?
No.
I didn't think so. You're a very lucky man.
Columbo shares that the amount of barbiturates found in Edna and Maryann were way more than anyone would ever take to go to sleep. It was almost a lethal dose. He says if it was in that coffee, they could have been put there by somebody who wanted to put you to sleep at the controls.
Maybe somebody wanted to kill you.
Now, why would anybody want to kill me?
I don't know, but you are a celebrity, and there are a lot of crackpots in the world, and there's just no accounting for people's reactions.
He says the only fingerprints that should be on that thermos are Tommy's, Edna's, and Maryann's. But the guy could have gotten careless with his fingerprints and left them on the thermos. Now you're wondering, why is Columbo suddenly talking about some other murderer? Well, he's working on planting a seed here, so we'll let him cook.
Man, you got some kind of imagination, you know that?
Columbo says when he gets a hunch about something and ignores it, he always regrets it. He says he's going to put a police guard on Tommy until they find that thermos.
But between those Boy Scouts, those forest rangers, and the sheriff's squad, we're gonna comb every inch of that mountainside.
Tommy does a real good job acting very unconcerned about this whole spiel Columbo went on about finding that thermos out there on the mountain.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. But it won't be necessary, Lieutenant. I'm leaving on a concert tour.
Columbo didn't see that coming.
When are you leaving?
This afternoon.
For how long?
For months. I open tomorrow night in San Francisco.
You're gonna be gone for months?
Tommy reaches out to shake Columbo's hand, saying it's been really nice knowing him.
I've enjoyed talking with you, and I wish you the best of luck.
Same to you, sir.
Columbo leaves very occupied in thought, and I think for the first time we see him get into a police cruiser.
Paul says he's going out of town. I don't believe him. I planted a seed that has to take. He's gonna do something up in the mountains first. Pull around the bend and walk.
Then we see a country western fella loading up the trunk with a suitcase and a red plaid garment bag. The luggage cowboy is played by Don Mantooth, born June 20th, 1952 in Ithaca, New York. He was in a few episodes of Kolchak the Night Stalker. Tommy takes off down the road in his rented 72 Lincoln Continental as Columbo and Mystery Cop follow him. They arrive at the parking lot to the airport terminal, and Tommy's red plaid garment bag attracted two red plaid wearing women. Columbo can't believe he's really leaving, so he gets out of the car and hustles to the building, and there's those two red plaid ladies again. Columbo walks in, trying not to be seen by Tommy. He sneaks behind some people and a big plant, and, well, one of those red plaid ladies is suddenly a clerk behind the terminal desk. Tommy spots Columbo and is about as subtle as Lily Lasanka when she wants to get someone's attention in a crowded room.
Mr. Franklin! You! Over here!
Hey, Columbo! Hey, what are you doing here? Come here.
Columbo is hiding behind the other red plaid lady. Columbo's a little embarrassed and tries to hush Tommy, who is as jolly as can be, just busy laughing.
What are you doing out here?
I followed you. You see, I told my superiors that someone might be out to get you, and if anything happens to you here in L.A., it's going to be my neck.
The man at the counter back there is Joe Pine from Blueprint for Murder, Dagger of the Mind, and Publisher Parrish. Columbo says he can't rest easy until he sees Tommy get on that plane.
I sure do appreciate that. That's mighty nice of you.
Columbo is just not getting the reactions he's expecting from Tommy. Tommy walks through the metal detector and it rings, so he has to empty his pockets. They reuse the same alarm sound that deafened us during Lady in Waiting.
What is it?
I shot Bryce.
You what? You must have some metal on you, sir. Put it in this tray here and come through again.
And he chuckles and hums and sings as he does this while looking at Columbo.
Hey, Columbo, keep law and order while I'm gone.
I always found it so funny he says that to Columbo. And look who just walked behind Columbo. A red plaid wearing lady. Maybe there's a convention.
Hey!
And there goes another red plaid lady.
Tell your wife hello for me.
And another one. Columbo's still not believing Tommy is going to get on the plane, walks through security.
Hey, mister.
LAPD.
They were very trusting back then. Well, there goes Tommy in the airplane, and Columbo walking out of the building looking defeated.
He went. That's him and that one.
Look, another red plaid wearing woman.
Well, you can't win them all, Lieutenant.
I guess not.
This mystery cop unlocks a police phone box, which suddenly brings Columbo back to life, realizing something very important. Now it is night, and we see Tommy driving his rental up the dirt road where the plane crash was. He gets out, looks around, and heads for where he hid that parachute. He has to do a little searching to try and remember where that hollowed log was, and he finds it with a smile as that same disturbed harmonica tune starts to play that was playing when he hid the parachute. I don't think I mentioned this yet, but the composer for this episode is Dyke Benedictis. There is a combination of new music and old music from previous episodes. So Tommy limps excitedly back to the car with his parachute, and then, oh, looks like Tommy saw the light. Another headlight reveal. We just love catching our murderers red-handed in the headlights. First, death lends a hand, and then Blueprint for Murder. Without a word, Columbo takes the parachute from Tommy and puts it in the back seat.
I was waiting for you up there on that rock.
Columbo is one dedicated man, isn't he?
You knew I was coming up here.
I knew, then I didn't know, and then I knew.
Columbo explains that he knew he was going to go look for the parachute when he told him the Boy Scouts and the Forest Rangers and all them will be out here. But when Tommy got on that plane, he thought he was gone.
Then I heard the keys. When you emptied your pockets at the airport, remember the keys had a tag, car rental tag. And he takes his keys with him on an airplane. Doesn't turn them in at the airport. I gotta figure he's coming back.
So they solemnly walk to the car, and Tommy is completely submissive at this point. Tommy asks Columbo, "Aren't you afraid being up here alone with the killer?" And Columbo responds saying, "No, sir, I'm not." He turns on the radio, and what do you know but I Saw the Light is playing. What are the odds of that? Not very good, I don't think. Columbo says he figures sooner or later Tommy was going to confess, even if he hadn't caught him.
Yeah, you're right, Lieutenant. I would have. Because it was getting to me, and I'm glad it's over.
Listen, any man that can sing like that can't be all bad.
Praise the Lord, I saw the light.
The end. This episode was written for Johnny Cash specifically. Hargrove kind of doubted Johnny would say yes because musicians make way more money going on tour than they would acting in an episode of television. But the filming dates just happened to work out perfectly. Johnny Cash had already toured over 100 concerts in 1973, and his touring was ending in December, which is when filming was to begin, and then to end in January. His final concert of the year was December 19th in Bakersfield, California. So, now knowing this episode was filmed in December and January, it makes sense why we can see their breath during the party scene and the ending scene, although I had no idea it got cold enough to see your breath in LA, but I guess so. Tommy's a little bit of a different murderer than the typical murderer status we're used to seeing. He wasn't rich at the time of murder. Yes, he was famous, but basically broke because of his domineering, blackmailing, hypocritical fanatic of a wife taking every penny he made. And you know what they say about fanatics.
Only a fanatic works on Sunday.
Only a fanatic works on a Sunday.
Interestingly, though, Tommy Brown is caught by Columbo because he didn't own a car, thanks to Edna. It was that rental car tag that helped Columbo catch him. So I guess mean old Edna did end up punishing Tommy after all.
And I would punish you, Tommy.
For not really being an actor, I think Johnny Cash did an exceptional job with his part. He seemed to be fairly relaxed and enjoying himself throughout. And other than falling down the hill after the crash, which was surely a stunt double, probably Bob Wooten, he did all his own little stunts, pretending to have a broken leg, crawling around in the dirt and leaves, rolling over that big hollowed log, falling backwards off a stool after Luke's punch in the face. Pretty good stuff, if you ask me. And you know, Tommy Brown is another one of the few murderers who are truly respectful to Columbo the entire length of the episode. The others up to this point, I would say, are Nora Chandler and Adrian Carcini. I'm quite impressed with how many different filming locations they used for this episode. I suppose they were doing their best to make this a good one because Johnny Cash was their star, and a ton of people would be tuning in. This episode definitely kept us busy. Although there are some viewers who consider a few of these locations fluff, the scenes I kept reading others kind of complain about are the Vito Scotti scene at the mortuary because it had absolutely nothing to do with the plot, but my goodness, it is one of the funniest scenes of the season. Then there's the scene with Columbo visiting Jeff at the hangar, the scene with the colonel, and the scene with the seamstress. But I think all those scenes are important, and there's not a single second I would cut from this episode. Probably one of the bigger complaints about this episode is how often they play I Saw the Light. It seemed to have annoyed people, unfortunately. I think the only time it was a little too much for me was the scene in the recording studio where it's playing so loud and that extra soprano voice grating my ears. So even though I wouldn't cut that scene, I would at least turn way down the music. I Saw the Light was written in 1947 by Hank Williams, the country western honky-tonk gospel blues singing legend. Hank was a believer, but had his life of heavy struggles, as we all do in our own individual ways. I Saw the Light is an ode to sin and redemption through Jesus. Hank Williams often ended his shows with this song or sang at least one hymn during his performances, which would throw patrons at the bars off guard. Now, Johnny Cash was also a believer with a life full of his own heavy-duty struggles, but in 1971 he was baptized, cleaned up his act, and began to openly share his Christian faith. Though he would still struggle with drugs on and off until he finally shook the habit in '89. And if you enjoy Johnny's deep, calm, southern voice and you need to brush up on the New Testament, he has read the whole thing for you. Well, if you're still here, I bet you can guess what I probably rate this episode. Yep, you got it. 5 Columbo cigars out of 5. It is way up there on my list of favorites. Let's real quick check out some alternate titles from other countries. Oh wait, never mind. The whole world agreed to call it Swan Song, I guess. And of course, we are still keeping track of our killer's heights. Johnny Cash was 6'1". Coming up next is A Friend Indeed.